The vidlink cast harsh light through the darkened dormitory, throwing flickering shadows across the faces of the shocked packless students huddled around the screen, witnessing a scene so bizarre it defied comprehension. A human woman kneeling in the streets of Kuala Lumpur, sobbing and clutching her daughter's lifeless body, shrapnel wounds peppering the little girl's chest and throat from the terrorist bomb. Emir leaned in closer, ignoring his stunned peers, studying the grieving mother with unwavering intensity. He had always been fascinated by humans, drawn to their strange mix of rationality and emotion. But now, watching this mother cradle her dead child, oblivious to the blood and chaos around her, lost in a world of unfathomable grief, Emir felt a strange twisting in his gut. A suspicion took root in his mind, dark and dangerous. Perhaps there was a strength in the human family bonds, a power in their love for their children that laid society lacked and desperately needed. He glanced at his fellow students, his resolve hardening. It was time to begin the research project he had proposed, a scientific study of human parent-child attachment, time to venture into the unfamiliar streets of Boston in search of answers, even if it meant risking his life and reputation for the good of his species. He had to understand the human secret. Emir sprinted through the unfamiliar streets of Boston, his heart pounding, legs shaking with the shocking images from the news broadcast. The grieving mother's anguished cries echoed in his ears as he ran, her raw display of love and loss seared into his memory. He had to understand this strange human bond between parent and child, had to unravel the mystery of their baffling emotional attachment. "Hey, are you all right?" Yer whirled at the voice, tensing as a human woman approached. She looked to be in her mid-30s, with kind green eyes and honey blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail. She wore pale blue nurse's scrubs. "I'm Maggie," she said gently, stopping a few feet away, her gaze flicking over his gray skin and pronounced cranial ridges. "You're one of those PACLU exchange students, aren't you? From Harvard? You look like you could use some help," Maggie said. "My apartment is just around the corner. Why don't you come with me and we'll get you cleaned up and fed? Then we can figure out how to get you back to your group." Emir wavered, torn between suspicion and a bone-deep exhaustion. This woman seemed to genuinely want to assist him, and truthfully, he needed aid. Needed time to collect himself and determine his next steps. "Thank you," he replied heavily. "I would be most grateful for your hospitality." Meanwhile, back at Harvard, Zachary burst into the PACLU students' dormitory, eyes wild with panic. "Emir is missing," he shouted. "We have to find him now. The Emperor has threatened to send a war fleet if he's not located within 24 hours. The PAC scholars surged to their feet, erupting into frenzied chatter. This was a catastrophe of the highest order. They quickly divided into search parties and set out to comb the streets of Boston, desperate to find their missing peer before it was too late. Emir absorbed her words like a sponge, trying to reconcile this foreign concept of a mother's devotion with the cold, sterile, communal child-rearing practices of his own species. How could individual parents invest so much time and emotion into their offspring? It seemed hopelessly inefficient, and yet little did he know that across the city, his face was flashing across every news channel as Zachary made an impassioned plea for information, that his fellow students were searching desperately, the specter of interplanetary war looming over their heads. For now, ensconced in the warmth of Maggie's apartment, Emir was blissfully unaware of the turmoil his disappearance had sparked. Yet as Emir finally drifted off to sleep, emotionally and mentally drained, one thought filled him with calm certainty. Regardless of what challenges the next day brought, his encounter with Maggie had been worth it, had given him a priceless glimpse into the very heart of the human species, and that was a gift beyond measure. Emir sat up, his mind racing. He had to return to Harvard immediately. His fellow students needed to hear about his experience, about the profound insights he'd gained into human familial bonds. "Good morning," Maggie said, poking her head into the living room. "How are you feeling?" "Better, thank you," Emir replied, "but I must go. My peers will be worried." Maggie nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Of course. Let me drive you back to campus." Within minutes, the PACLU students had gathered in their common room. Emir stood before them, his gray skin flushed with excitement. I propose that each of us spends a week living with a human family, Emir explained. We'll immerse ourselves in their daily lives, participate in their routine, forge genuine connections. Emir raised his hand, silencing the group. Listen to me. I spent less than a day with a human mother and her child, and it changed everything I thought I knew about family dynamics. Imagine what we could learn in a week. He described his time with Maggie, the warmth of her home, the depth of emotion in her stories about her own mother. As he spoke, he saw uncertainty replace skepticism in his peers' eyes. "Can you show me how to do pack math?" Liam asked one evening as he struggled with his homework. Emir hesitated, then nodded. He began explaining pack-led mathematical concepts, simplifying them for Liam's understanding. To his surprise, the boy's eyes lit up with genuine interest. "This is so cool!" Liam exclaimed. "Mom, did you hear that? Emir says they use base 12 for everything." Across town, Zara found herself in a very different situation. The family she was staying with was in crisis. Their teenage daughter, Emily, had run away from home after a heated argument. Zara observed the parents' frantic worry, their tearful phone calls to Emily's friends. She saw the depth of their love in their anguish, in their refusal to give up hope. Without hesitation, Zara offered her help. "I have access to advanced tracking technology," she told them. "With your permission, I could attempt to locate Emily." The parents agreed immediately. Hours later, thanks to Zara's pack tech, Emily was found safe at a friend's house. As the family reunited in a tangle of tears and tight embraces, Zara felt a strange ache in her chest. She realized with a jolt of surprise that she envied them their closeness. But first, they had to figure out how to translate their personal experiences into scientific data. As Zachary joined them, notepad in hand, Emir took a deep breath. The real work was just beginning. Emir leaned forward, his gray fingers steepled under his chin as he addressed the group. "Our homestays have given us invaluable insight, but we need to go deeper. I propose we conduct in-depth interviews with human parents who have made extreme sacrifices for their children." Zara's eyes lit up. "Brilliant! We can use our emotion scanning technology to analyze their neurological responses as they recount their experiences." Zachary, who had been quietly taking notes, spoke up. "I can help identify suitable candidates for your interviews. I know of several compelling cases that might interest you." Over the next few days, the Pack Lee students prepared for their interviews. They calibrated their advanced scanning equipment and developed a series of probing questions designed to elicit emotional responses. "When they placed Jack in my arms for the first time," James said, his voice cracking, "I knew I'd do anything for him. Anything." Emir watched in fascination as the scanner's display lit up, showing a surge of activity in James's limbic system. "So, when the doctor said he needed a kidney transplant," James continued, "there was no question. It was terrifying, sure, but I'd have given him both kidneys if I could." James closed his eyes, his hands trembling slightly. "Scared out of my mind, but also calm, because I knew I was doing the right thing. The only thing." As the week progressed, the Packley students interviewed more parents. Michelle Davis, her eyes bright with pride as she spoke of her daughter's ballet performances. Mark Erickson, his scarred hands tracing the air as he recounted rushing into a burning building to save his son. During one such break, Emir found himself sitting alone in the common room, staring at his hands. Zachary approached, a concerned look on his face. "It's overwhelming, isn't it? Listen, I've been thinking, would you be interested in continuing your connection with Maggie as a sort of ongoing mentorship?" Emir's face lit up. "Yes, I would like that very much." "I'm honored to be your mentor," Maggie said, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. "And I'm excited to learn more about your culture, too." As Emir walked back to the dormitory, his mind raced with the implications of their research. The neurological patterns they'd uncovered were undeniable. The human capacity for parental love wasn't just an emotional phenomenon, it was hardwired into their very biology. He found his fellow students gathered in the common room, poring over data and comparing notes. Emir took a deep breath and addressed the group. "What we've discovered is profound, far more profound than I ever imagined. But it's also dangerous. Dangerous to our knowledge and far more challenging to our worldview." As the days passed, the Pack Lee students found themselves grappling with the implications of their research. Their initial focus on traditional family structures had yielded profound insights, but Emir sensed there was more to uncover. "We need to broaden our scope," he announced during a team meeting. "Human families come in many forms, not just biological ones." Zara nodded enthusiastically. "I've been reading about found families, groups of unrelated individuals who form deep emotional bonds. It could provide a fascinating new dimension to our research." Emir and Zara found themselves at the doorstep of the Sullivan household. Tom Sullivan, a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a welcoming smile, ushered them inside. "Your family now," Tom said simply, ruffling Nathan's hair as the boy giggled. Emir watched in fascination as Tom interacted with Mia and Nathan. There was no biological connection, yet the love and protection in Tom's eyes were unmistakable. The PACLA students meticulously documented the unique rituals and traditions through which these found families strengthened their bonds. They observed movie nights where inside jokes flew thick and fast, impromptu dance parties in the kitchen, and quiet moments of unwavering support during times of stress. Weeks passed, and the PACLA team found themselves changed by their experiences. They had witnessed acts of selflessness and commitment that defied their previous understanding of family dynamics. One evening, as they sat around the dinner table, Liam looked up at Emir with a mischievous grin. "You know, for an alien, you're pretty cool. You're like my weird space uncle or something." In a solemn presentation to the Harvard student body, Zara unveiled their groundbreaking discoveries. Brain mapping evidence showed that the human family bonding process activated ancient neural networks shared by all sentient species, networks the Paclades had suppressed through their culture of detachment. "Our findings suggest," Zara explained, her voice steady despite the weight of her words, "that we Paclades have been consciously denying ourselves a core component of sentient development." The auditorium fell silent as the implications sank in. Millennia of Pac cultural evolution were suddenly called into question. As the presentation concluded, Emir felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to see Zachary, a look of profound understanding on his face. As the auditorium buzzed with excited conversation, Emir knew that their journey was nowhere near the end. In fact, it was just beginning. "You're letting human sentimentality cloud your judgment," Grohr sneered during a heated debate in their common room. "Centuries of PACLA progress, and you'd throw it all away for what? Hugs?" Emir stood his ground, his voice steady. "It's not about hugs, Grohr. It's about a fundamental aspect of sentient development that we've been denying ourselves." "Enough," he bellowed, and the room fell silent. "We need to approach this rationally. I propose we present our findings objectively to the PACLA Emperor, letting the data speak for itself." Emir felt a chill run down his spine. He knew he couldn't let that happen. In a bold move, he requested an audience with the university chancellor. With trembling hands, Emir prepared for his video presentation to the PACLA High Council. Maggie and Liam sat nearby, offering silent support. Suddenly, shouts erupted from the council chamber. "Blasphemy!" one member cried. "This goes against everything we stand for." "By order of the military command, this transmission is terminated," a gruff voice announced, and the screen went black. "We have to do something," Liam said, his young face etched with worry. Zachary burst into the room, his usually calm demeanor shattered. "Grohr," he contacted the military. "They're detaining any students who supported the research." Maggie sprang into action. "We need to keep Emir safe. There's a loophole in the International Student Agreement if we claim him as our legal ward." As Maggie and Zachary worked feverishly to secure Emir's asylum, reports flooded in of unrest on the PACLA homeworld. Human governments issued stern warnings threatening sanctions against the PACLA regime. Days later, Emir found himself in a safe house with Maggie's family, watching news reports of protests erupting across PACLA cities. The magnitude of what they'd set in motion was staggering. "I never meant for this to happen," Emir whispered, his gray skin ashen. As night fell, Emir stared out the window at the twinkling stars. Somewhere out there, his homeworld was in turmoil because of what he discovered. Yet he knew deep in his core that they couldn't turn back now. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with danger, but the profound truth they had uncovered was worth fighting for. The safe house door burst open, startling Emir from his reverie. 3 armed figures in PACLA military uniforms stormed in, their weapons trained on the alien student. By order of the High Command, you are to be detained and returned to the homeworld, the lead soldier barked. Maggie leaped between Ymir and the intruders. You can't take him. He's under our legal protection now, the soldier sneered. Your human laws mean nothing to us. Before Ymir could react, a stun blast hit him square in the chest. As consciousness faded, he heard Maggie's anguished cry and Liam's muffled sobs. He awoke in a sterile cell, surrounded by familiar faces, his fellow students who had supported the research. Gror stood outside, a smug expression on his face. Days blurred together as Ymir and his companions endured endless interrogations. They clung to their convictions, refusing to denounce their discoveries despite mounting pressure. Meanwhile, on Earth, Zachary paced Maggie's living room. We can't just sit here while they're imprisoned, he fumed. Maggie nodded, her face set with determination. I've been granted legal guardianship over Ymir. That has to count for something. Their efforts bore fruit. Within weeks, the human government issued a strongly worded ultimatum to the Pakla regime: release the students or face crippling economic sanctions. On the Pakla homeworld, unrest simmered beneath the surface. High Council member Trila, intrigued by the suppressed research, began covertly distributing copies of Ymir's presentation. The underground movement grew, fueled by long-dormant emotions finally given voice. Trila's impassioned speeches ignited a spark of revolution in the hearts of reform-minded Pak-Li. As civil disobedience spread across major cities, the emperor's grip on power weakened. Trila seized the moment, organizing a daring raid on the military compound where Ymir and the others were held. Under cover of darkness, rebel forces breached the facility's defenses. Alarms blared as Ymir's cell door slid open, revealing Trilla's determined face. Come quickly, she urged. We don't have much time. They rushed through chaos-filled corridors, dodging energy blasts and toppling guards. As they neared the exit, a squad of loyalist troops cut off their escape. In the ensuing firefight, Ymir watched in horror as rebels fell around him, the stench of ozone and blood filling the air as he scrambled for cover. As dawn broke, news of the bloody raid spread like wildfire. Outrage at the regime's violent crackdown galvanized the populace. Sensing the tide turning, the emperor made a calculated decision. Ymir nodded, his mind racing. We need a new cultural framework, he mused. One that embraces our capacity for love without abandoning our intellectual pursuits. For days they debated, drawing inspiration from human mythologies and the vast tapestry of cosmic existence. Gradually, a revolutionary doctrine took shape, one that elevated familial bonding to a cornerstone of Pakli identity. We must bring this message to our people, he told Trilla. It won't be easy. The old guard will resist. Together, they prepared to smuggle their manifesto back to the Pakla homeworld, knowing that the real struggle for their civilization's soul was only beginning. Ymir's heart raced as he and Trilla huddled over the encrypted transmission device. Their fingers flew across the interface, uploading the final version of the familial bonding doctrine to their network of underground operatives across the Pakla homeworld. It's done, Trilla breathed, her eyes gleaming with a mixture of triumph and trepidation. But the jubilation was short-lived. The Emperor's forces descended with brutal efficiency, energy weapons cutting through the masses, screams of pain replaced by chants of freedom as thousands were rounded up and hauled away to detention centers. Meanwhile, on Earth, Maggie Sullivan's living room had transformed into a war room. Screens flickered with news reports from the Pakla homeworld, each more dire than the last. Maggie nodded, already dialing her phone. I know just the person. Ambassador James Marrow's face appeared on the largest screen. Miss Sullivan, I've been expecting your call. The situation on Pakli is concerning. It's worse than concerning, James, Maggie replied. It's a humanitarian crisis. We need sanctions, and we need them now. As Morrow worked diplomatic channels, Dr. Eliza Choi held press conferences, presenting irrefutable evidence of the regime's atrocities. Public outrage grew, and soon the Security Council convened in an emergency session. Incoming fire! A technician shouted as the base rocked with explosions. Ymir grabbed Trilla, dragging her toward the evacuation pods. As they ran, a transmission crackled through. Aboard their escape craft, Ymir's hands shook as he piloted through the debris field. We can't keep running, he said, his voice low and determined. For weeks, Castillo drilled the resistance fighters in covert operations. They learned to move silently, disable security systems, and fight with ruthless efficiency. The night of the royal banquet arrived. Ymir's team infiltrated the palace, moving like shadows through opulent corridors. The sound of shattering crystal and panicked screams signaled the operation's start. Ymir burst into the throne room, energy weapon raised. The Emperor stood defiant, sneering at his nephew. "You would destroy everything we've built," the Emperor spat. He pulled a data crystal from his pocket. "This contains proof of everything we've discovered. Surrender now, or I destroy it, and with it, any chance of a peaceful transition." As Trilla's interim council took control, Ymir allowed himself a moment of relief, but he knew the fight was not nearly finished. Reports of Gror gathering loyalist forces in the outer colonies kept the resistance on high alert. "Incoming transmission," the palace's AI announced. "Priority 1. Ymir's fists clenched. "How bad?" "They've fortified a base on Dragvix. Our intelligence suggests they're planning strikes against our new family bonding initiatives." Before Ymir could respond, an explosion rocked the building. Alarms blared as smoke billowed from a nearby educational center. "It's begun," Trilla said grimly. Over the next weeks, chaos engulfed the packed territories. Schools implementing parent-child bonding programs were reduced to rubble, and assassins targeted key reform leaders. Ymir found himself constantly on the move, barely evading attempts on his life. A chime from her comm device interrupted their discussion. Ambassador Morrow's face appeared, his expression grim. "Maggie, I'm afraid I have terrible news." Across pack space, the assassinations sparked widespread riots. Crowds demanded vengeance, their newfound emotions erupting in waves of violence. "Sir?" A junior officer approached hesitantly. "There's someone here to see you. A human." Frank Castillo strode in, his weathered face set with purpose. "I hear you've got a pest problem." "Gror, please!" Ymir pleaded, lowering his weapon. "This madness has to end." Gror's eyes blazed with hate. "You're the one who's mad!" he snarled, lunging forward with a vibro blade. Ymir barely dodged the attack, feeling the weapon slice through his armor. They grappled, crashing into consoles and overturning furniture. Gror's strength was fueled by rage, and for a moment Ymir felt his grip weakening. "Couldn't let you have all the fun," the human grinned. With Gror's death, Ymir had hoped for a respite. Instead, the militants splintered into dozens of cells, each more vicious than the last. Hit-and-run attacks left colonial outposts in ruins. The dream of a peaceful transition seemed to be slipping away. In a secure conference room on Earth, Dr. Eliza Choi presented her findings to a somber group. The dissident brains show significant atrophy in regions associated with empathy and bonding, she explained. But our latest research suggests these pathways can be reactivated. "I'll do it," Ymir interrupted. "If there's even a chance of ending this bloodshed, I have to try." Weeks later, Ymir lay on an examination table, his head surrounded by a web of sensors and neural interfaces. Dr. Choi's voice guided him through a series of visualizations, each designed to stimulate dormant emotional centers. "Picture yourself holding an infant," she instructed. "Feel its warmth, its vulnerability." One morning, as Ymir reviewed security footage, he found himself fixated on an image of Liam. A wave of emotion crashed over him, fierce, primal, overwhelming. For the first time in his life, Ymir understood what it meant to feel like a father. Word of Ymir's transformation spread slowly, cautiously. Other extremists began to come forward, volunteering for the reintegration program. With each success, the tide of violence receded. A year after Gror's death, Ymir stood on a platform overlooking a vast crowd. Families, real pack families, gathered to celebrate the new era. As he began to speak, Ymir caught sight of Maggie and Liam in the front row. His heart swelled with an emotion he was only beginning to understand. "My fellow Packlades," he began, his voice ringing out across the square. "Today we take the first steps on a journey that will reshape our civilization, a journey guided by the wisdom of our human friends and the strength we find in each other." The crowd erupted in cheers, but Ymir knew challenges still lay ahead. The work of building a truly integrated packless society had only just begun. At the heart of this transformed society stood the Yiran Academy, its gleaming spires a beacon of progress. Inside its halls, Ymir, his hair now streaked with silver, observed a classroom filled with young Packlades engaged in lively discussion. Later that day, Ymir stood before a packed auditorium as Philar took the stage for her symposium presentation. The audience, a mix of Packlades and visiting human dignitaries, listened intently as she spoke. After the presentation, Ymir found himself surrounded by eager young Packlades. "Elder Ymir," one asked, practically vibrating with excitement, "is it true we might be able to study on Earth?" Ymir nodded, a plan already forming in his mind. "Indeed, I believe it's time for a more immersive cultural exchange." The night before departure, Philar sat in her family's living unit, packing the last of her belongings. A knock at the door revealed Tuak, his usual stoic demeanor tinged with an unfamiliar nervousness. "Father," Philar said, looking up from her task. Tuak hesitated, then stepped inside. "I wanted to talk to you before you leave," he began, his voice uncharacteristically halting. Philar's eyes widened. She knew her father's work kept him off-world for extended periods, but this was different. This was a chance to truly connect, to bridge the gap that had always existed between them. "I would like that very much," she said softly. The next morning, as the sleek transport ship prepared for launch, Ymir addressed the assembled exchange students. "You carry with you the hopes of our people," he said. "Learn, grow, and show humanity the depth of Pac-le potential." As the transport ship touched down on Earth, Philar and Tuak stepped onto the bustling Harvard campus. They were greeted by the Wilson family, who welcomed them into their home. Over the next several weeks, Philar marveled at the intricate dance of human family life, the shared meals, the casual affection, the occasional disagreements that were resolved through compromise and understanding. She felt a deep connection growing between herself and the Wilsons, a bond that transcended species. Tuak, too, found himself growing close to the family, especially to young Derek, who saw him as a mentor and a friend. Yet not all was peaceful. The radical elements within both human and Pac-le societies saw the exchange program as a threat. As tensions mounted, Philar and Tuak worked tirelessly to maintain the bonds they had forged. One evening, as the family gathered for dinner, alarms blared throughout the neighborhood. An emergency broadcast warned of an imminent attack by extremists determined to sabotage the exchange program. "We have to leave now," Tuak shouted, grabbing Philar and pushing the Wilsons towards the basement shelter. They huddled together in the dark, the sounds of distant explosions shaking the walls. Derek clung to Philar, his small hand gripping hers tightly. "I'm scared," he whispered. "So am I," Philar replied, her voice trembling. "But we'll get through this together." As the night wore on, the sounds of battle gradually subsided. When they finally emerged from the shelter, the neighborhood was a smoking ruin. But the Wilsons' home had been spared, thanks to the quick actions of local security forces. "It's over," Tuak said, his voice filled with relief. "For now," Philar added, glancing at the smoldering remains of the buildings around them. "But the fight for our future is far from over." In the aftermath of the attack, Philar and Tuak became even more determined to succeed. They redoubled their efforts, working closely with the Wilsons and other families to foster understanding and cooperation between their species. Their work did not go unnoticed. As reports of their success spread, more and more Packlades volunteered for the exchange program. The program expanded, and soon Pac-le families were living in communities across the globe, sharing their knowledge and learning from their human hosts. As the months passed, Philar and Tuak became pillars of the community, their work helping to build a bridge between two very different worlds. They knew that their efforts were just the beginning, that the road ahead would be long and difficult. But they also knew that they were making a difference, that they were helping to create a future where humans and Packlades could live together in peace and harmony. And that, they realized, was worth any sacrifice. Years later, as Philar stood before a new group of exchange students, she couldn't help but feel a swell of pride. The program she and Tuak had helped to build was thriving, and the bonds between humans and Packlades had never been stronger. "You carry with you the hopes of our people," she said, echoing Ymir's words from so long ago. "Learn, grow, and show humanity the depth of Pac-le potential." The students nodded, their faces filled with determination and hope. Philar knew that the future was in good hands. As she watched the transport ship lift off, carrying the next generation of exchange students into the sky, Philar felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The journey had been long and difficult, filled with challenges and hardships, but in the end it had all been worth it. The bonds that had been forged between humans and Packlades were unbreakable, and the future they had worked so hard to build was finally within reach. And so, as Philar turned to leave, she couldn't help but smile. The path ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time she felt a sense of peace. She knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, as one people, united by the bonds of family and the strength of their shared humanity.